Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting live stream for this week's Fedex St. Jude Championship. Gonna break down everything you need to know heading into lock to make sure you're ready for all of your DFS and prop exposure and with any questions that you might have. So first off, say hi if you haven't already, and with any questions that you have, just feel free to go ahead and fire away. I'll answer them by the time we get out of here. On top of a look at the weather report, we'll talk about ownership for DFS a bit, some lineup strategy, lineup construction stuff, and then towards the end, some prize picks and underdog exposure. They might want to go out there and get some exposure to yourself. So as I said, looking forward to it. Should be a really solid week. Let's go ahead and get after it. We got kept down there, says back to the grind. Let's get after it, man. We got Sean down there asking about studs and duds. We'll talk about the lineup construction a little bit later, specifically when we get to the DFS section, but I'm going to have a good mix of both of those kind of builds. So I'll talk about the advantages, maybe the pros and cons of getting to either sort of scenario. But yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Soda Kid down there, what is going on, my dude? Says hit that like button. You heard the guy? Let's go ahead and knock that right on out the way. But we'll start this off with a look at the weather forecast and whether there's a discernible edge over there between Thursday and Friday. And unfortunately, because this is a no-cut event, there are no defined AM versus PM waves. You're going to be hard-pressed to find that sort of advantage. So I will say that I do have a little bit of a weather angle to potentially consider, but there's nothing definitive between the two quote-unquote waves. So for Thursday, if we take a look at this HRRR model, you'll see that it looks pretty much divine the entire day. You're talking about sub 7 miles an hour of sustained winds. Definitely going to be hot out there in the afternoon. So I do think that the morning wave will have more receptive conditions than what we have there in the afternoon. And because of some of the rain that the golf course got today, I do think that you're going to see some low scores out there tomorrow morning. So we'll talk about that with props. That is impacting some of my decision making on that side. But in terms of the golf course, I think whether you're starting in the morning or let me get a sip of this here, or potentially a little bit later on in the afternoon, that you're going to get about the same kind of conditions. I think the morning wave is going to get perhaps a small advantage out there for tomorrow, but that's more so when it comes to the ceiling performance. Let's bring up the NEM model. Let me get a sip of my coffee here. The throat is definitely a little scratchy. And then I will talk about Friday because as you can see, a lot spicier with the forecast. And I think where there could be a little bit of a larger edge. White chocolate mocha, can't go wrong with it. Got to drink them sparingly because they have like 1,000 calories in one of these damn things, but definitely pretty delicious, that's for sure. Let's talk about this Friday forecast, though. So as you can see on here, the winds are substantially more significant than what we had over there on Thursday. And whether you're going to be starting early or late there on Friday, it doesn't look like it's going to be as good conditions. So, but you're going to see some low scores tomorrow, perhaps even something like a 62 out there, I would imagine. But out there on Friday, your ceiling score is probably going to be 5, maybe 6 under par. So I think you're going to see a pretty big difference from that perspective. But the morning wave is going to have the better side of it. You can see there that the sustained winds get much higher as the day goes on. And while the wind gusts are pretty consistent, if not maybe slightly higher in the morning wave, in general, we'd expect conditions to deteriorate as the day goes on, whether it's the sustained winds, as we mentioned, or potentially the greens baking out. I do think that on Friday, they did get some rain today, as I mentioned. It's going to start to evaporate tomorrow afternoon. And then out there on Friday, you've got the wind. It's supposed to be 96 degrees and sunny out there towards midday. And could get borderline crusty out there by the afternoon. So if I think there's going to be any sort of like 0.3, 0.5 shot advantage between the, again, quote unquote waves, right? Because we have this no cut event, maybe the later starters on Thursday that in general are teeing off earlier on Friday get the slightly better side of things. And I say the slightly better side of things because it's nothing that I'm going out there in full stacking for this event. I've taken 20% of my lineups, so 30 of my 150 large field GPP lineups, and taken at least 4 players that are teeing off late. Now, the reason why I didn't go with any full end stacks is it's a no cut event. As I said, there's no defined waves out there, and I don't see a definitive edge, right? Again, I'm just making my best guess based on that Friday forecast that we have, that maybe the afternoon is pretty tough, right? If it's going to be firm, fast, and windy at TPC Southwind, that's when you see it get a little bit harder than it otherwise would play. So I don't think it's anything to really go all in on. in terms of one wave versus the other, especially when there are no defined waves out there with rounds 1 and 2. So that's what I'll say about the weather. We always want to keep a look at that. If you want to take a look at some of the round by round stats, last year, the scoring was flat because conditions were very comparable day to day. But what I'll show you is that you do get a wide range of scoring. So back there in 2022, you can see it played 0.34 under par in round 4. Round 1, it played a whole 1.4 strokes under par. So obviously, one day was when it was really calm out there when they started the week. But by the afternoon, when the winds kicked up, it was nearly a stroke difference. And it's not going to be that drastic out there between the two waves. But even if it's only a minute difference, right, like 4 or 5 miles an hour, that is going to count around a TPC Southwind. So just to drive that point home a little bit further, back in 2021, actually, that's the Northern Trust. So we'd have to go over here to the WGC St. Jude to go out there and find a few other events. But you'll see here in 2021, right, the round 4 played 0.94 over par. The other 3 rounds, 1.3 under, 1.6 under, 1.8 under par. It can have a massive impact when it comes to the scoring. So tomorrow, expect to see low scores. As I said, probably at least a 1 under par scoring average. Round 2, when it's going to be windy, potentially firm and fast out there, I don't think it's going to play over par with the kind of strength of field that we have here, but it wouldn't surprise me if it played a lot closer to even par. So just have that in your modeling. There's no cut line this week, so there aren't going to be guys trying to battle it out there on Friday, but you might see a few ejection rounds out there. So I don't know if you can completely change your strategy because of one of the 4 rounds, but round 2 is definitely one where you're going to have to hang on a little bit. And if you're worried about somebody hitting a bunch of water balls, maybe they're not the best wind player, well, you want to probably pay special attention to them out there for their Friday exposure. Let's bring up our DFS stuff. We'll go over some of your questions here as well before we completely deep dive the slate. And what we're going to do for DFS, we'll talk about ownership out here in each range, some of the real chalky players maybe to keep an eye on, right, for better or worse out there in your exposure. And then as you can see, a few highlighted plays that I wanted to point out. So we're going to talk about Scotty. I'm using him. I've used him every single week here in 2024. So that should not be a surprise to you guys. But we'll talk about where his ownership's going to come in. I actually think he'll be a little bit lower owned than the rest of the industry. And we're going to do that for a bunch of different spots. So like Sanjay will be on our list. So if you have a question, I may skip it if you're talking about one of these players, as we're going to talk about them in a lot more detail later on. So an Eric Cole's going to be talked about. We're going to talk about Eckert, also a Nick Taylor towards the end of this live stream. But anyone else that you want my full take on, could be an ownership number, could be whether there's pros or cons to taking any sort of guy, just let me know down there in the live chat and we'll get to it. So where are we at? We got Paul Johnson down there, says, what's going on? Hey, Luke. Hopefully you're having a solid evening, man. You got Sean down there, smash the like button. Jeff says, what's going on? Just living life. Excited for this week. It's the playoffs. What's not to love? What's going on, Ross? Is there going to be a weather edge? Yeah, I don't think there's going to be. And yeah, I love your puns out there, dude. You're doing it every single week. We're walking in Memphis with Luke. Dude, they've got good barbecue down there, good music, as you alluded to. Should be a really solid weekend. I might go there next year. I was talking to my parents about it. They've been to Memphis a few times for, different sort of events. Maybe not the most action-packed city, but they said really good food and stuff. So maybe we'll try it out sometime. What's going on, Bart? What's going on, Nick? We got Smoke down there. Kevin, he says, could Cantlay put it together this week? Definitely capable, right? He lost in a playoff a few years ago. Definitely somebody who's in play. What's going on, Barry? Let's get it, Luke. Good luck this week. Appreciate that, man. Best of luck yourself. Last week is done, but wanted to say thanks for keeping us up to date, of course. Yeah, last week was crazy. I mean, I've got to say, I'm just happy to be back to a somewhat normal tour event. Now, fingers crossed, knock on wood, whatever we have to do to make sure we didn't just mush that. But yeah, dude, last week, I'm just glad to be back to a normal sort of event. Winner chicken dinner with Scheffler. Yeah, we'll talk about him, dude. It'd be hard to pick against him this week. That's for damn sure. That was crazy. Thoughts on Homa for a pivot? We could talk about Homa, so we'll do that right now. So he's not somebody I wanted to point out in particular, but I guess just a full transparency, tip my hand a little bit. I am using him in some lineups. Now, it's very sparingly. I'm not playing him in more than about 8% of my builds. I believe it was 7.5% that I landed on in my lineups. But I think he has some upside. He's going to be extremely low owned. We know the kind of long-term player that Max Homa is. The issues, there's a lot of them, right? It's not really just one issue out there with Max Homa. It's the form, it's the course fit, it's the driving accuracy. There are a lot of things going wrong with his game right now. But if you're willing to throw that aside, if if we're playing in the largest of field GPPs and you're okay taking on a low floor player, then by all means, right, take a shot on somebody like Max Homa. But if you're playing in like a single entry, something a little bit more substantial when it comes to the buy-in, I would have a lot of caution against using them. So I think it's about where you're playing them. If you're going to use somebody like Max Homa, I think there's a time and place for taking somebody that's just like a pure shot in the dark. But that's essentially what you're getting with Homa. He's had a really sorry track record around this golf course. He's actually losing about a stroke per round to the field. And a lot of those performances were in non-signature events. So this event got a lot stronger when it went to just the top 70, when they took out the cut line and all that. Even before that, he was really struggling around this golf course. So I've got to say, right, full transparency, I am using him in spots, but you'd be crazy to ignore some of the red flags, right, out there with him as well. So I do want to mention that. What's going on? Bo says, hey, brother, Homa is a nice pivot. Yeah, so I just mentioned that there as well. I do think so. What's going on, Mr. Awaken Up? Hopefully you're having a solid Wednesday out there. What's going on, Primo? Nathaniel says, players, do they get to pick their tee time or is it random? They're assigned. So they're not technically random because they do have like an algorithm that they use to select them, but they will kind of change them, right? They'll tinker them a little bit to try and get some of the better players together. But yeah, the players don't have control over that. That is either the PGA Tour that'll kind of change them around a little bit, right? Maybe take like a Xander and Scotty and put them together, that sort of thing. But outside of that, the players have no control over it. What's going on? Nick says, hope I'm having a good day. I am. Thank you for that. And he said, do I have any thoughts on Sam Burns? So Sam Burns, not a player that I was going to point out, but I love the question on because just like the Max Homa play, I think he's a potential leverage spot. I don't think he's going to be sub 7% owned like you're going to get with Max Homa, but you're going to get sub 15% ownership on Sam Burns. And if you take a look at the course history, it's maybe a little bit sneaky, but he had a runner-up finish at this golf course. So he's done it before at TPC Southwind. He's one of the best Bermuda grass putters that we have in the world. And this year has sneakily been a lot more consistent. He's had a much more complete game. He's had an around the green game that has actually shined out there this season. And it's why he's made a lot more cuts, but hasn't had as many of those flashy top fives. So another player that's done that is Colin Morikawa, where I think it's just a matter of time before those guys start to pop off again. They're playing much more sustainable golf. Like I said, much more consistent results here in 2024. And I know a lot of people will look for those flashy finishes, right? It's all about finishing first in golf, right? It's all the casuals and public talk about, right? Or how many wins or somebody like Scotty Scheffler has. But there are a lot of guys that have had really solid seasons that if you've played him in DFS, like a Colin Morikawa, for example, you're not winning the large field GPP, right? When you're using him on top of somebody that's maybe winning that golf tournament. But in single entries, in stuff where it's not about finishing in first place per se, you're probably feeling pretty good about how he's done for you this year. So I think Sam Burns is that same kind of guy, right? I know I was mentioning Morikawa and whatnot, but Sam Burns is much of the same. The Amex near win was about as close as he come to winning, but it's been a lot more top 20s this year. So I like the way he's trending. I think even in large field GPPs, he still has that upside because I'd argue that he's playing better golf now than he ever has before. And I don't think a lot of people would agree with that. Now, the stats completely back me up, right? That's why I'll say that. But yeah, some of these guys I think need to be deep dived because they're really good plays, in my opinion, that you just haven't seen that ceiling yet. And again, I think it's just a matter of time for some of them. Primo says you're liking Straka this week. What do I think about him? So I'm at like a 6 out of 10 on him. He's got good course history. Finished runner-up to Will Zalatoris in a playoff. He's played about other positional Bermuda grass tracks. So PGA National, for example, Honda Classic previously. I've got the Cognizant Classic hat on right now, actually. He's won that event before. So it's one of my top comp courses. You like that. You like the runner-up finish here. So a course horse per se. The issue is that that's going to drive up his ownership. So it's not something that is unknown, right? A lot of people have talked about that in content this week. So I've got him at just over 10% ownership. So I think that if you like him this week, right? If you love the play, the form for me is the sketchy part. It's not horrible form by any means, but it's not the kind of form you'd hope for with like a 10 to 15% owned player. That's my hesitation with him. So I guess just full transparency, he's not my favorite play this week. Like I said, probably like a 6 out of 10 when it comes to my personal sentiment right out there on the play, but he's far from a poor play. He makes sense. He's good course history. Like I said, form isn't terrible by any means, but that would be the one hesitation for me. What's going on? Antonio says, yo, Dr. Frankenstein, what's going on, my man? He said, thank you for all you do. I really appreciate that, man. And he said, you're feeling young and Fleetwood this week. I like that. I think that both are certainly guys that you could see pop at this golf course. I think young with the form, obviously let down on Sunday, but the other 54 holes were great stuff. So I'm totally fine with that. I'm taking his prop for round one. I took his under on 69 strokes. So I'm trying to ride that hot hand as well. The Fleetwood play I like even more though. So for DFS, I guess I'll just tip my hand there as well. I am not using him this week. He's one of the guys that was one of the last few guys that I had to cut out of my player pool, but very accurate driver. Form is there. I mean, hell, really put up a good run out there at the Olympics. And he's decent enough on Bermuda for me. Like his long-term stats aren't that impressive on it, but he's good enough for me. So yeah, I got to say I'm not there myself. It's just opportunity cost, right? I can only take so many guys myself. Even as a 150 maxer, right? There's only so many guys I can play up top, but I did like the play a lot. Hit the like button. You heard the guy. Yeah, let's pump up those numbers. I can't see the live counter now, but let's go ahead and get that thing up there. Antonio says, I don't know if I looked at Wyndham Clark's stats for the season, but they were shockingly amazing. I look at them all the time because I'm doing prop stuff, Antonio. I've got all kinds of tabs just saved over there on my Google Chrome to go out there and do prop research. He's number 3 on tour, maybe number 4 now. He might have dropped a spot in birdie or better percentage. His approach stats and green regulation, like he's like above average. Not the best driving accuracy. So that would be the issue at TPC Southwind is, can Wyndham Clark go out there and hit enough fairways? But he showed us at the Players Championship that he can. Went out there, nearly won the golf tournament, right out there from a Scotty Scheffler. It's a very wide range of outcomes. You saw that the Olympics, I think a similar style of golf course to what we're getting this week. You can see the bad Wyndham Clark, right? Round one shoots yourself out of the golf tournament. But from Friday onwards, from Friday through Sunday, he had, I believe, either the best or the second best score of anyone in the field. So there's a wide range of outcomes, as I mentioned, right? For the rounds out there for Wyndham, if he keeps it together for 4 rounds, he could win the event. That is something that Wyndham can do. That's why I think he has a ton of upside out there this week. However, there's no cut to miss. Maybe that's a good thing for him, right? You're going to have plenty of chance to go out there and make birdies, but he could finish dead last. That's especially at this kind of golf course. So I love Wyndham Clark for props, like specifically for birdies. Like, for example, this week he was at 3.5 birdies for round one. Like, what are we doing out there in underdog? That projection made absolutely no sense. And I think there's spots to use him like in showdown, right? In the main slate, maybe you have that one round that trips him up. But if you play him in showdown, sure, if you play him the day that he sucks, that's not great. But if you catch him when he's hot, then that's a really good thing to go out there and play. What's going on? We said thoughts on Eric Cole. We're actually going to talk about Eric Cole. So I'll save my full thoughts on that one, but I do like him this week. It's going to happen with Fleetwood. Okay, I like it. JT, first round leader, finishes 69th. That would be on par for what he's done recently. That's for sure. He's started hot. He's another one of those really good showdown plays. The one thing I'll say, Ross, I was having a conversation with my mom about this, actually. My mom, big golf fan. She watches these live streams sometimes. If you are, hi, Mom, down there in the live stream. But she said the same thing. She's like, oh, he's just sucks that one round every event. He's going to put it together eventually, just like Wyndham, right? Wyndham's going to put it together for 4 rounds eventually. Those sort of players they do that, they win, essentially. I mean, they're playing that kind of golf. I would say Wyndham's probably a little bit closer than Justin Thomas to doing so, but I bet JT this week. I'm hoping that he can. Maybe he doesn't have that one tripped up round, and if he does, I mean, hell, he's playing good golf, that's for damn sure. Do I like Davis Thompson this week? He's got really good form, and he's played well at good comp courses, so I can't tip my hand on quite everyone, AO, but I think that I've got him at like a 7.5, 8 out of 10, so it would be hard for me not to play him. Kim says, favorite play between Sungjae, Kim, and Henley. I love all 3. It's like having me choose between my 3 children, right? Trying to pick a favorite. That's really tough. If I had to pick one of the 3, I'd pick Russell Henley. He's also the chalkiest, though, out of those 3 players. So you've got to balance that aspect. But just in a vacuum, my favorite guy that I think is going to play the best, Russell Henley probably does it the most often. I would say. Do I like any underdog fantasy stuff? Yeah, I play it occasionally. I do some of their best ball stuff from time to time, but not my main focus. They just don't have the biggest prize structures quite yet. Some of the major championship stuff they had was a lot better when it came to like big payouts. That's why I like Draftkings, right? Draftkings has much bigger contests reliably, so that's why I focus on that side. But I like their product. I think it's okay. I have a lot of negative things to say about Underdog too. I'm a very transparent person, right? I'll say the great about companies. I'll rave about that all I want, but I'll also point out the things that they do wrong, which it's not the time and place to talk about it. You've heard me rant 1,000 times on it before, but yeah, I like their product for fantasy, especially the best ball format, something a little bit different. I like the fact that the qualifications work a little bit differently as well, right? It's not just like a normal fantasy contest. So I like a lot of things about it. Let's talk about some of these plays here, though. So if you have any questions, we will circle back on that. But what I'm going to do now is go through each range. We're going to talk about some of these highlighted plays and then also some of the ownership trends. And speaking of ownership, I think a good place to start is with Scottie Scheffler. I've got him lower owned than pretty much everyone else does. I've taken a look at some of the other ownership sources out there, and some of them have him like 30-something% owned, 28 to 30% is a common sentiment that I saw, and I just don't see it at $12,400. In fact, when I ran my first set of ownership, I was first to market as I normally am, right out there with my ownership projections, and I'm at 18%. So I thought that this price tag would suppress a lot of people using them, especially because we don't have that $5,000 range. The last time this happened, he came in at like, I think it was like 19.5% owned in the large field GPP, which is why I had him down there at like 18.5%. You can see, obviously, I've ticked it up just a little bit, but I still have him lower owned than everyone else because I feel like people are forgetting about that, right? The fact that there's only so much salary that you can spend. And there are guys like a Morikawa who's going to garner some ownership. Rory McIlroy, I think, is also going to be relatively high owned too, that I just can't see him being 30% owned. So I just want to point that out. It's not like I'm saying Scotty's going to be low owned, right? I still got him at 24.6%, but even I think that might be a little bit high. I think if anything tomorrow morning, there's a good chance that Scottie Scheffler is lower owned than where I have him, which again, in comparison, my projection is already lower than where you have some of the other spots in the industry. So that's what I want to say about Scotty. If you were worried about ownership out there with playing him, I wouldn't worry about it. Like if you're on one of your ownership sites and they've got him like 34, 35% owned, you probably wouldn't want to use them out there in your lineups. There's no guarantee of this. Again, they're projections. I'm just doing my best job to, essentially, I don't want to say guess where the ownership's going to come in, but obviously going off of experience, using the experience that I have as a DFS player, I can't see him being that high owned, like pretty definitively. So if I'm wrong on that, I'm not going to have the kind of leverage that I'm looking for, but I'm at about 45% out there in my exposure. And I think there's a good chance that is 2x leverage. I think 22 to 24% is probably where he's going to come in GPPs. And I'm very comfortable getting over the field on that. Like I said, if he's going to come in 20 to 25% owned, then by all means, right? Give me all the Scottie Scheffler out there. If I'm wrong, he's 35% owned, I'll be okay with my 45%. Won't be as thrilled. Won't have the kind of leverage that I was hoping for, but that would certainly be unexpected. I would not expect him to see that high ownership on him. And I just want to get out there like first thing and say that, right? Like there's definitely a lot of other people that would disagree with that take, but that's my take on it, and I'll stand behind it. That's for sure. Outside of that, the ownership is pretty spread out. You've still got about 18, 19% ownership on guys like Xander Schauffele, Rory McIlroy. You guys can see the exact percentages, of course, over there on my Patreon page. But outside of Aubert, who I kind of expected to be a little bit lower owned, nobody is that much of a pivot. Everyone's at least 10% owned, including Aubert up here in this range, if not about 15% owned denier. So I would say just pick your guys up top. Like I said, I don't think ownership should be the reason that you're not playing Scottie Scheffler, because even if he is 30% owned, I mean, let's cross that bridge, right? Let's say you wake up tomorrow, he is like 30, 35%. it's one of your 6 spots. You still got 5 other spots to get leverage and get different to the field. It's not the end all be all. So I wouldn't let ownership take you off of any of your guys up there in that 10K range, because you just don't have to worry about it. Even in the 70 player field, there are plenty of guys in that 6, 7, even 8K range that you can look to for some leverage to go ahead and offset that ownership. So that's what I'll say up top. I will obviously Morikawa is one of my favorite plays as well. Somebody that I bet outright at plus 1650. But yeah, Scotty Scheffler, world number 1. It would be hard to argue against playing him this week. Moving down to the 9K range, ownership is also pretty spread out. Some of your lower owned options would include a Victor Hovland, who I've got slightly lower owned than guys like a Cantlay or a Hideki Matsuyama. Down here in the 8K range, there's really no one that is quote unquote low owned here. I think the lowest owned player that you have, just off the top of my head, it might be Finau, but I think it's either, actually, it might be Sahith. Sahith might be your quote unquote lowest owned player in this range, but just like the 9K range, it's not sub 5%, that's for sure. And it's not even going to be sub 7% out there on any players in this range. So once again, I would say just play your guys. I don't think the ownership up top, like even the 8K range, like I don't think you have to fixate on ownership so much. You're going to have plenty of opportunities in that 6 and 7K range to go out there and get different. And it doesn't even have to be with ownership in all 6 spots. You could do it with your lineup construction as well. So I know we had a question before about, maybe going studs and duds, potentially going a little bit more balanced. I think that if you went super studs and duds, that you're not going to be that different to the field. I think there's going to be a good amount of lineups that try to go Scotty and another spent up option. But if you go hyper balanced, so let's say that you skip all the guys from like 10K plus, maybe even like starting with Morikawa, but like if you started with somebody a little bit cheaper than that, like maybe a Patrick Cantlay, no one is going to build like that this week. So even if there are chalky guys in this 8K range that you want to use, there are ways to deploy him and get a little bit different. Maybe it's by skipping that 10K range and then hammering, 2, maybe even 3 guys in that 8K range that you really like as your second through like 4th man in lineups. Those kind of lineups are possible, and I think are going to be pretty different to the rest of the field. So I like a lot of guys in this range. I think that's why I wanted to point that out, because like you guys know I like Corey. I talked about Billy Horschel, Justin Thomas in my DFS preview. Sanjay, I still like it about like 15, 16% ownership, but Tom Kim I love this week. I love Russell Henley with his course fit. Sam Burns, I know somebody asked about him before. There are so many guys in this range, and some of them are even carrying relatively high ownership numbers when I'm jamming into lineups. I just think it's the spot where you have the best course fits out there for this kind of event, and the price tags are very reasonable as well. So whether I'm starting Scotty and then just like maybe even taking 2, 3, 8K guys as my like second through third man in, those kind of lineups have a lot of intrigue to me out there on this kind of week. I mentioned the Sanjay M play a little bit. I like his course history. He's had a really good track record around TPC Southwind. A little bit of a disappointing performance last week, so I think that keeps the ownership relatively in check, but I still got him at about 16%. So it's not like he's going to be a leverage play by any means, but if he had gone out there and had any sort of form heading into this event, you're looking at like a 25% on Sanjay M. He's got one of the best track records out of anybody at this golf course. In fact, I believe he's number 2 in the field when it comes to shots gained per round. And even with the shaky week, he's number, 8 in the field when it comes to recent form ranking. So obviously isn't impacting his shots gained all that much. Still like those two. I did bet Billy Ho at 50-1. If you guys didn't see the preview, I also bet Justin Thomas at 40-1. Billy Ho, by the way, had 4 straight top 10 finishes at this golf course before it ended up turning into a WGC. So elite level course history out there. And Justin Thomas, a lot of you probably don't know this, but has won around TPC Southwind. That was at the golf course when it was the WGC St. Jude. So something to consider with those two players. And because a lot of databases aren't showing the full course history, you're probably not going to see that kind of information out there on a Billy Ho and a Justin Thomas. And the result of that, you can see, right, both of them are relatively low owned. Moving down a little bit further, still like myself, some Matt Fitzpatrick, but his ownership is royally low. Essentially, nobody is using Matt Fitzpatrick. So if you're going to start a little bit chalkier, maybe it is a Scotty and then one of these relatively chalky 8K guys, a good way to just offset it right off the bat would be to mix in somebody like a Matty Fitz. You have other guys in this range that are maybe quote unquote better plays, like a Shane Lowry, for example, but they're like double the ownership as somebody like Matty Fitz. So I think if you're going to start chalkier, this is where you want to start to think about potentially getting different. So just like taking a bunch of chalk up top isn't the end of your lineup, you still have to account for that though, right? And I think a really good way to start to do that would be with some of your top end of the 7K players, because there are spots here where you could eat some ownership. Like, for example, Brian Harman's like 10% owned. I've got Adam Scott in that same kind of range. Those kind of players, a Cam Young as well. Certainly Aaron Rye. Aaron Rye is one of the chalkiest players in this range. Actually, he is the chalkiest player down there in this range. You use any of them as a third man in after starting like a Scotty, then one of the other chalky 8K guys, then good luck getting leverage, right? You have 3 other spots where you're going to have to try and find like sub 6, maybe sub 7% owned sort of players. If you just go to Matty Fitz, you're still going to have to take at least one more pivot, but it does so much for your product ownership. It does so much for getting yourself, unique out there in those contests that I think he's heavily in play for that reason. And by the way, course history for Matty Fitz at the WGC absolutely ate up this golf course before he was even remotely the kind of player that he is today. So if you're a course history guy, if you're a course fit guy, there's a lot of reasons to like him here. A lot of the course fit comes around the fact that he's good with his mid to long irons, pretty solid on Bermuda grass, as you can see with the stats over here. And off the tee, at least when he's trying to be, can be very accurate off the tee. In terms of chalk, there's not that much to point out. I'll point out some of the guys that are like 10%, I guess, which is getting a little bit chalky in this range, except Straka's getting some ownership. I already mentioned Brian Harman before, a Davis Thompson, I guess that's about it. No one really else is crazy owned. I guess Grazerman at about 9.7% is getting some ownership steam, but nobody down here is like an automatic fade. Just like up top, right? I don't think you have to cross anybody out just because they're like that high owned. There's nobody that's that egregiously high owned. Honestly, the only one that I think you can make that argument for would probably be Aaron Rye. Coming in off the win, I've got him at like 20% ownership, and he is quite literally like double the ownership as somebody like a Sam Burns. But like this top end range, right, there's nobody that's like double the ownership of like guys that are averagely owned. And then even in this 7K range, your chalk is like 10, maybe 11% owned. And at that kind of number, it's like double the ownership of the pivots. So like Jordan Spieth, for example, like he's one of your quote unquote low owned diamonds in the rough in this range, and he's still like 5-6% owned. So you're talking about if you're trying to find like a pivot in this range, right, going from like a 10% guy down to a 5% guy, it's just not a massive difference, which again, I'm not advocating for only playing the popular guys, but what I am saying is that if you have a few guys down here that you want to take that are like 10% owned, right? Somebody mentioned Sepp Straka before, a Davis Thompson, for example, you could do so. Just again, you're going to have to find at least one, maybe 2 spots to get different. And it doesn't necessarily have to be those 2 players. A candidate could be an Akshay Bhatia to try and get some of that leverage, because it's gone at only about 8.5% ownership. So 8.8% was where he came in on my last run there, and $7,300 for a guy that's won this year. He's had one of the better track records around these shorter positional tracks, is I think an absolute steal. Now, the form has tailed off just a little bit. There was a time this year where he was gaining nearly 3 strokes per round to the field. 0.8 strokes is solid stuff, right? He hasn't completely fallen off the cliff. But I think now you're getting them, you're buying the dip on him, right? You're getting him when he's going to be much lower owned than he probably should be. And he's not super low owned either. Like I said, even the pivots in this range are still going to be like 8% owned, but at least he's going to give you some of that leverage to the field. Still like Keegan, still like Grazerman, as I mentioned before. Both of them are guys that have been outright and for top 10. A potential leverage spot could be Eric Cole here at $6,700. He's not one of those super low-owned guys down here in this range, but an elite tier course fit is really good on Bermuda grass. The form has gone a lot better lately out there for Eric Cole. And now we're getting him at a golf course where it's not all about being a super long player off the tee. We've seen him contend at the Cognizant Classic, Honda Classic, when it was that event as well. So I think there's a lot of good comp course history that you can lean into as well. And seems to be peaking at the right time of the year. So I'm okay with an Eric Cole. I know we had the question about him before, so I did want to give you guys my full take on him there as well. But even once again, like he's not chalk by any means, but he's still 8% owned. So that's what I mean about the ownership this week. It's a wacky one. It's maybe not as easy to get the leverage as what you're hoping for, but I think if anything, maybe you worry about it a little bit less. It's just that the format's not great for ownership, and I think accepting that ahead of time is probably a good idea. At least that's my take on it. Austin Eckroat down here at $6,300. Another guy I want to point out as well, coincidentally won the Cognizant Classic this year. You've seen him play well at positional tracks. He's a top 50 driving accuracy player on the PGA Tour. He's not the best putter on Bermuda, but has had a few ceiling performances this year, most notably at PGA National on that hybrid Bermuda grass surface. So I like a lot of and the ball striking models, by the way, are always going to push Austin Eckroat towards the top end of the board. Because if you go to the last 24 measured rounds, I mean, it's really good stuff. He's gaining 0.46 strokes off the tee, 0.33 strokes per round with his approach play, which isn't blowing away the rest of the range. Like you can see Hadman's doing pretty good stuff himself. Johnny Vegas actually doing even better work out there with his tee to green play, but he's one of the best, if not the best, down here in this range. So short game obviously leaves a lot to be desired, but the short game isn't what we're worried about with these ceiling performances. In large field GPPs, if Austin Eckroat is going to be an optimal play, it's going to be because he ball strikes the living hell out of it. Goes out there, is gaining like 5-6 strokes tee to green, which he has shown that he's capable of this season. Then the last guy I wanted to point out is the whole way down at $6,000. He's a pure minimum price tag. Also the first guy here that is actually sub 5% owned. And there are not that many out there for this golf tournament. And he fits this golf course to a tee. He's more of that precision guy off the tee, not the longest guy, a hyper accurate player when he's playing his best golf, better mid to long iron player than he is with his shorter stuff. And on Bermuda grass, you can see is a slight gainer to the field. Well, his issue lately is that he's been losing a shit ton of strokes putting. In fact, he's well into the negative with his flat stick with his recent form, but he's 0.77 strokes better per round on this surface. So if there's a spot to get the get right spot for Nick Taylor, right, go out there, try and actually gain with the flat stick, it's at this style of golf course. So that's what I'll say about some of the highlighted plays. And what I wanted to show you by going through these options wasn't necessarily guys that you have to use in your lineups. It's more so what I'm looking for in players. I'm looking for form in a lot of cases, and then I'm also looking for course fit. Somebody that's won at a similar style golf course with guys like an Austin Eckroat, Eric Cole that tears up the shorter courses, a Nick Taylor with solid form, right? Another one of those course horses out there in my exposure. That's what you see with a lot of the different players that I'm taking. And the one commonality that you find with everyone here is that they're all accurate drivers. I think that that's the one prerequisite that we have around this golf course. And for almost every single player in my exposure, I think the 28 players that I'm using in my large field GPP pool, I think all but one of them are guys that are in the top half of driving accuracy on tour. I think there's only one player I'm taking that's a little bit of a loose cannon off the tee, and it's one of your best players in the field. I'm not going to say who it is. It's somebody that's up there towards the top end of the pricing that I'm still playing despite a little bit of a wonky driver. So it's one of those kind of weeks. Find your narrative, find what you're going to hunker down on. For me, some form, and then, like I said, a little bit of that driving accuracy. So find your secret sauce for this week. Find your way to correlate lineups, select your player pool, and live with the process, right? That's all we can do as PGA DFS players is try and build lineups that are going to be plus EV. We can't control the results, and the fundamentals for DFS are not going to change for this kind of week. No, it's a no cut event, smaller field, that sort of thing, but you do the same thing as you guys do for any other given event, right? You take your lineups, you incorporate ownership, and make sure you're not taking too much chalk. That would probably be rule number one. Rule number two is, again, have that process to find your top plays. Don't be picking names out of a hat, right? Have things that you're looking for in players. You can take bits and pieces from what I've given you here in the live stream, implement them yourself. The parts that you agree with, right, are probably the things that you should implement yourself, right? The stuff that you're seeing eye to eye with me. And then add on top of that, things that you want to innovate, right? So I know, for example, I get asked questions all the time about narratives, right? We'll talk about like, guys on the bubble, right? Maybe trying to get into the next week. I'm not huge on that kind of stuff, right? I didn't talk a whole lot about that at all, right, here in the live stream. But that doesn't mean that you can't use that for your process, right? So just trying to spitball, right? Give you guys, things that you can do to build on that, to go out there and try and find your own process. So that's all I've got, guys. We're going to go ahead and catch up on any last second questions. And then I'll afterwards talk on some prop stuff. So let me get a sip of my coffee. Let's find where we left off and get this thing going. Zach, smash the like button. You love to see it. Good stuff, my man. Hopefully you're having a good Wednesday. Antonio says, is Homa too broken to bet or play this week? If you're going to do it, play him in DFS. Yeah, he does look a little bit, quote unquote, broken, as some would say, but I don't think he's that far off that he couldn't pop. I'm playing both kind of builds, Nick, but I don't know if it's like 1 week where you have to play one or the other. So I would probably punt that question and say probably not. What is my take on Spieth? Somebody had to ask, of course, huh? So I'm not going to say whether I'm playing him or not. I'm just going to avoid that one. You're going to probably be able to tell what I'm doing with him based on what I say here. He is the ugliest play in human history. He's got the injury going on right now. He claims he's not willing to take divots, and you can kind of see that with the iron play. But, but it's a huge but. He's driving the golf ball incredibly well. He has played very well at this golf course in the past. And the issue's normally been the driver. The issue's been he'll hit a few water balls, take himself from in contention at TPC Southwind to just out of it, like those top 10s, top 15s. He's got a ton of them around this golf course. This year, he has been tenfold more accurate off the tee. I mean, his penalty shots per round has dropped about in half, which I don't think enough people have talked about. There are things about Jordan Spieth's game that have gone a lot better this year, most notably that off the tee play, but also his putter has gone a lot better this season. The other stuff is what's hard to ignore. So I would say if you're using him, it's kind of like the Max Homa kind of thing. You do it knowing he's probably going to suck. You just kind of have to accept that ahead of time, but that there is a world, that there's some scenario out there, if you've seen the Marvel movie where who is it? Doctor Strange is like going into the future, looking at all the outcomes. There is a world out there where he wins the golf tournament because he has that kind of upside. Same thing with Max Homa. Like, none of us would be completely mind blown if either one won this event. You go like, okay, like Jordan Spieth's a future Hall of Famer. Okay, I get that, right? Max Homa, not quite that kind of player, but like he has got 4 or 5 wins the last 3-4 seasons. Like it really wouldn't be that mind blowing. However, it's hard to look at them and feel good about it at all, is what I'll say about it. So I've probably tipped my hand on what I'm doing. But yeah, those are the pros and cons to playing them. Tons of upside, undeniable. We all know that about those two. The floor is non-existent, though, that's for sure. My projections must be really good. A friend of yours uses a different site and thinks he's going to be switching to Luke soon. I think you should. They are really good. If you took a look at the model from last week, the top 5 was nearly identical to our model. And yeah, projections are based on that. So hey, I would agree with your friend, that's for sure. So you should go ahead and sign up. The thing is, Scotty, is that the last time he won, GPP winners didn't have to have him. Yeah, that's a decent argument, right? But there's also been a ton of times this year where you've had to have him, right? So I think the one you're talking about, by the way, is the one where he won in the Olympics. You didn't have to have him in GPPs because you had guys like Rory that went off that week, Tommy Fleetwood that was expensive, Hideki, right? All these guys that were in that 9-10K range that went off. If Scotty Scheffler wins and it's not him going head to head with like a major championship sort of field, then you absolutely have to have Scotty Scheffler. So you can make that argument all you want, right? But that's one example compared to the other 6 times that he won this year where you had to have him out there in GPP. So definitely fair to say that was true at the Olympics, but there's a larger sample size this year. In fact, 83% of the time this year where you had to have him out there in lineups. So it's a fair thing to say. $12,400 is nothing to scoff at, but at the same time, it takes a very specific kind of scenario for that to pay off. And I think the last time that happened, also Rory won the Canadian Open, and he didn't have to have him for that event because he was going head to head with Tony Finau, who was also in the 10K range, and I forget the other guy. There was another player at that golf tournament. Maybe it was a Xander Cantlay, something like that. I can't quite remember a few years ago, but where there were so many guys that were up there in contention that you didn't have to have the winner. Those are the only 2 examples that I can think of, though, right? Where that's been the case where the winner isn't in the large field GPP lineup. Every other time, you have to have them. So that's what I'll say about it. Not to derail the stream, but anyone on the fence, sign up. Luke Sheets save you a bunch of time and money. I appreciate you, my man. Didn't ask you to go out there and do so. I promise he's not a plant there in the live stream, but it's true. It should save you time. The projections are spot on. I'll stand behind that. I'll stand on business for sure when it comes to my projections. And I think they're great stuff. And I think you'll like them as well, as Bart said. Kep says, for round 1 showdown, is it best to be heavy on the AM? I would, yeah. I would probably only go only AM players, I would say. Because I feel like for round 1 showdown, people are really lazy. I think they just take their main slate pool and build lineups out there from round 1. If I was going to play round 1 showdown, I'm not. I would only take AM players. That's what I would do. Interesting spot to try a Steven Jaeger. You're hoping the greens help the putting woes. So I don't want to talk you off of Jaeger because I think he has upside. You've seen him win this year. When he has his best stuff, a lot of times it's him getting into contention. The one thing I'll say about the putter is that it is better than what he's had recently. He is a stroke better per round on Bermuda grass, but he is still losing strokes to the field. Now, it's ever so slightly, but he's losing 2/100ths of a stroke per round out there putting on Bermuda grass. So, yeah, it's better than what he's done lately, but it's not like he's gaining half a stroke per round. So I think he's a decent play. I think he's in play. But yeah, dude, the putting might just be there. He might suck putting this week. But if he can gain 5 strokes tee to green, maybe only lose a stroke or 2 putting, that might be okay enough for like single entries. You might be totally fine with that. Large field GPP, you need the putter to be a little bit better. That's for sure. Antonio says Dunlop is plus 450 for a top 20. Are you crazy, or is that still really high for somebody as good as Dunlop? So I would say that's far more because of the course fit. The sports books are probably doubting the off the tee a little bit. I would imagine he's a very inaccurate driver. That's the one thing you can really say about his game is that he does not hit many fairways. However, this is a layup golf course. Somebody like him could choose to hit a lot of driving irons off the tee and could be a lot more accurate that way. So I think that he's a really talented player. You guys have heard me rave about Nick Dunlop like 20 times at this point, so we don't have to do that again. I don't have to gush over the kid again. But yeah, I think he's a high upside player. If you want to take a sprinkle on that, I am not going to talk you off of it. That's for damn sure. Kim says, do I think that Benny Ann is a decent course fit? Not my favorite, that's for sure, but I think he's okay. Thoughts on Taylor Moore? So your last name is Moore. I have a slight suspicion that either related or you know him. I have to say I do like him this week. I'm not changing my answer based on that. Reason because he's good on Bermuda grass. One of my top comp courses is Innisbrook. And hey, if you know Taylor, tell him good luck this week because I think he's a good course fit. I think he's well within play. He's a very high upside player. And what I like about him and for like showdown specifically is that when he's playing his best golf, the guy's capable of nuking. I mean, going out there shooting 7-8 under par, you've seen him do it multiple times this year. So for that reason, I usually try and take him for a single round sample as like a lot of young players. Sometimes he has like one bad round, right? Where it can kind of go the opposite direction. So I think that he's a decent option. I like the course fit, but showdown's probably my favorite spot for him because I could easily see him going out there marrying together that iron play and putting that he's known for and shooting something real low. And that's going to take him hitting fairways. That's also maybe a little bit of a weakness for him, but he's capable of turning that around. Do I like Denny? He hit the irons well last week, but putted poorly. I do. Yeah, he plays well at a positional golf course where you don't have to overpower it with your driving distance. So yeah, I'm okay with him this week. I'm using him just for some transparency. Touche, no, not related, but thanks for your stuff. Yeah, I figured I'd ask with the last name crossover, but yeah, I think he's a solid option, that's for sure. And he said, love my channel. You just recently found it. Well, we'd love to have you here. So welcome on in and hopefully you stay here for a while, man. All right, let's talk through some lineup construction. I'm going to bring up Draftkings. We're going to build a single lineup together just to give you a little bit of thoughts, right, to what I'm thinking through when I'm actually clicking names into a build. And then afterwards, we're going to talk through props. So we've got stat averages that we're going to talk through. We've got some prize picks and underdog stuff that we're going to go through as well. So if you're here for props, just stay tuned. We'll be there in just a few minutes, but I am going to put the finishing touches over there on the DraftKings side. So if you have any questions for me on DFS, go ahead, let me know down in chat. Now is the time to go ahead and sneak those in. And if you haven't already hit that like button, first off, what are you guys waiting for? And also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content to come. Of course, we've got the rest of the Fedex Cup playoffs, the entire fall swing this year. Also NFL content that's coming around. But if you don't know, I cover round 2 through 4 showdown. So obviously we do this main slate stream every single week at 7, but for rounds 2 through 4, I'll cover the single round of golf every single time and props out there for rounds 2 through 4. So make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss any of that to come for future events and for the rest of this weekend. But let's build a lineup together now. So had to do the plugs at some point here on the live stream. So let's go ahead. give you guys the thought process out here when building, which a lot of it comes down to the contest that you're entering. And for the sake of this build, a lot of my exposure this week, in fact, I only have one single entry that I'm going with. The rest of my exposure is all 150 max. So I'm going out there, entering large field GPPs, trying to beat a good amount of other entries. And you can see here in this contest, right, it's 47,000 other entries that you're trying to beat. And you got to kind of check your thought process when you're going through and building lineups. And what I usually like to do when we get to this section of the live stream is remind you guys the fundamentals of building a DFS lineup, because you have to have a game plan in play to go out there and take down one of these contests. Your thought process, your selection process, we're going out there and actually clicking names, should not be the same in this kind of contest as what you're doing in cash, right? Going out there just trying to finish in the top 50%. Your thought process when trying to beat 47,000 other entries should not be the same as when you're going out there in a 100 entry single entry, when you're only trying to beat less than 100 people out there. It's a completely different scenario. You have a completely different, mindset for trying to take down 47,000 other entries, because you need the absolute nuts to win. And if you're going to go out there and make plays, even as a 150 maxer like myself, I think it's 28 players in my player pool this week, which is a good amount for sure, right? I get it. Just under half the field out there in my player pool, I'm going to have a hard time getting the optimal lineup. I mean, I do this every week, and you have a really hard time getting to the optimal lineup. If you're going to beat 47,000 other people and you actually get the right players, the right 6 in your player pool that go out there and pop off this week, you don't want to share them with the rest of the field, right? So the reason why in the large field GPP, we talk about ownership over and over and over again. We talk about, this guy's chalk. You can't play this guy. He's like 25, 30% owned. Is because when you get things right, when you happen to go out there, pick the right narrative for a week, you don't want to share them with everyone else. You don't want to be like, everyone got it right this week. So now, even though I'm playing against 47,000 other people and I have the absolute nuts, well, guess what? I duplicated it with 5 people. Well, there you go. Your, $50,000 payout that you're looking for in the GPP, or in this case, $200,000, gets split between 5 people, which I'm sure you'd be happy about that payout. I mean, a lot of people, right? They've never even taken down GPPs before, right? And I'm sure that a lot of those people would be thrilled to go out there and win like $60,000 or whatever that would end up being. That act of duplicating yourself, though, is unbelievably detrimental to your long-term ROI. If you were in simulations, if you take a look at like bankroll managers over like a few years, those are the people that go broke playing DFS, because even when they're winning and they're having a good week, they're not getting the kind of payout they should. And it's not just about duplicating. It's also about trying to beat other lineups. When you get shit right, when you hit on somebody and they win, right? If they're 30% owned, it's nice to have them. You're probably going to have them for the large field GPP, but that's really not doing shit for you. It's really not, because 30% of 47,000 entries is like 15,000 other people. So good luck. You still have to beat 15,000 other people with your 5 other spots. Doable, but it's a completely different other thing when a sub 5% owned guy goes out there and smashes. Even a sub 10% owned guy goes out there and smashes. You're going to get a much bigger boost out there in your exposure. Whereas a lot of what we just said in like a cash contest essentially means nothing, right? You're only trying to beat half the field. And even in like 100-person single entry, you're only playing 100 people. It is a much easier thing to go out there and beat 100 people. I mean, this is obvious. I mean, I didn't have to tell you this, but it's much easier to beat 100 people than it is 47,000 other people, right? So your lineups, when playing the really big GPPs, the lotteries, as some would call them, you should probably account for that, right? That's what I'll say about that. So the way that we do that is we get more different in the bigger contest, right? When we're playing a larger field GPP, you want to try and be a little bit more ballsy about it, right? Go for broke a little bit more so that when you get things right, you actually have a chance to take it down. You're not playing against a third of the field out there with your exposure. So just to show you, I know it was a big, long rant, but for anyone that's new to DFS, I think that's an important thing for a lot of them to hear. And even if you've been playing this for a while, I don't think you can hear that conversation enough. Sometimes you need that reset to go out there and build your lineups. So I know some people that have been here for 2 years are probably rolling their eyes, but I'm going to continue to say it going forward. People need to hear it. So let's go ahead and build a lineup together here. So we're going to start with Scotty just so I can prove this point. we're taking maybe the chalkiest player on the slate up top that is not going to be a death sentence when it comes to our ownership. So for our second man in, I'm also going to throw in a relatively popular play out here with Sun JM. So we have got a 25% owned Scheffler. We've also got a Sun JM who have got it about 16%. So we're not really getting that different with our first two spots. In fact, I wouldn't really say there's much leverage at all right out here with these two plays. But we've got four other spots, about 72-25 remaining for each spot to go out there and try and get this leverage. And it's not like you have to find a sub 5% owned player with each spot, but we just have to be a little bit cognizant about what we're doing here. So what I'm going to do towards the top end of the 7K range is I'm going to throw in a Matty Fitz down there at $7,800. He's about 5-6% owned. He's got elite level course history here. So the form's not great. That's why he's going to be a little bit lower owned, but he has upside around TPC Southwind. I mean, you've seen it with some of those top 10 finishes. So let's throw him in there. He's going to give us some of that leverage we're hoping for. Now we're going to go a little bit cheaper, and I'm going to throw in Batia. Batia, he's 8.8% owned, projected in my projections. That's not crazy low owned, but at the same time, he's only 8% owned. So if he goes out there and hits, you're only using him against, let me see, like 3,500 people, maybe even less than that out there in the large field GPP. It's not like you're playing against 15,000 people that also have an Akshay Bhatia. Now we're down to $6,900 remaining per player. You could throw in, I don't know, Keegan Bradley, right? He's not low owned, but he's also not high owned down there at about $6,900. And then our last man in, because we have three pivots already, like Matty Fitz relatively low owned, like Batia, Bradley are pretty reasonable ownership. As long as you're not taking a mega chalky option here, I would be totally fine. So even though Cam Davis is like 10%, even though somebody like Tom Hoagie, I wouldn't qualify as low owned, you could take them, spend all of your salary here, and this would be fine for the large field GPP. So I point this out to show you that, sure, you have to think about ownership a little bit, right? You can't just take all chalk, but you can still afford to take a Scheffler and a Sun GM in lineups, right? It's just about what you do with your other 3-4 spots. So that's the lineup construction segment. I know I had to do my little rant when it came to ownership there. Let's catch up on any last second DFS stuff, and then I'll talk through props. Only 40 likes. The Steam is chocked full of cock gobblers. I agree with that. If you haven't hit the like button yet, you are, as he said, as what Kay said down there. I won't repeat it, but you're absolutely right if you haven't hit the like button. And let's just get those numbers up, right? It's a like button down there. What are you shying away from hitting that for? And you're telling you have a chance? Yeah, I think you're talking about the Homa speed thing before, right? It's like there's an outcome where they can get there. You got a chance, that's for sure, Mike. All right, let's talk through some prop stuff. So in terms of the averages around this golf course, I think what we saw last year is going to be spawn line with what we get for this year. It's was low winds out there in 2023. It was also relatively soft last year. And this 1.4 under par scoring average is pretty much exactly what I'm expecting for round one. So this birdie average, the bogey average that you can see on here, I think are going to be pretty accurate out there for tomorrow. So I expect to see the field score to about 4 birdies per round. Bogey average, about 2.4. I think that's a pretty good number out there for tomorrow. And greens and regulation and also fairways, I'm not sure if you're going to see a big sway in either direction. I've heard that it's a little bit firmer and faster this year than what we had for 2023. So maybe the greens and regulation fairways go down just a little bit, but I wouldn't expect it to change all that much, at least until we get that wind out there on Friday. So if you haven't joined us, if you're just joining us here in the live stream, the conditions on Friday for round 2 are going to be a lot spicier than what we have tomorrow. But if we go over here to the HRRR model and go back to Thursday, you can see it's sub 7 miles an hour wind the entire day. So I think that Fridays, we're going to see that big difference. Scoring average maybe closer to even par then. But Thursday is probably going to look a lot like what we had from last year. So obviously, it's round 1. The course conditions could surprise us a little bit. So I'm not leaving that outside the realm of possibility. But I had a lot of exposure that I've already gotten to. So let's go ahead and cover some of that here together. So bringing up the PGA board, some of the stuff I've taken is bumped, but there were a few options that we still had on the board. So I'm going to throw in this Colin Morikawa over. I believe the couple fades I took for greens have all moved already. I already know they moved the one fairway prop that I took, but we can also mix in this fade of Justin Rose strokes. So I'm going to throw that in there. And then Do they still have Billy Horschel up? So they bumped him down from 68.5 down there to 68 strokes. So yeah, I guess we'll go with these two. So I was thinking about maybe doing a 3-man slip for you guys, but because they've moved some of the other things that I've taken, these are probably the best 2 things that are available on the board. So just to give you some comparison, first off, let me bring up the Fanduel board so I can show you some sportsbook lines, because they do have up some birdie stuff on FanDuel, and Colin Morikawa is a plus EV lean. So not only do I like him this week, I bet him outright at this golf tournament. He's also a plus EV lean for the over at 4.5 birdies. So to me, that was a no-brainer to go out there and mix in. So just to show you that over there, Colin Morikawa is minus 140 here on FanDuel. So that was just something that I wanted to get exposure to. He's a player that's top 20 in the world when it comes to birdie or better percentage. If the birdie average is going to be about 4 per round, well, that's asking him to gain about a birdie to the field, which for a guy that's an elite level course fit, again, somebody I think that has a good chance to win this golf tournament, I think that's a far from an unreasonable thing to ask. So 4.5 birdies, I took him for the over. And yeah, again, if you're a plus EV better, he checks that box for you as well. And then this Justin Rose prop, I took him for the over at 68.5. And you could probably get a sense for why I would like that if we take a look at some of the round score stuff here. But like Russell Henley is a much better player, much better course fit, much better form. He's at 68.5. Now he is juiced under, but if we find somebody else that's maybe closer to what Justin Rose is, I could show you what we're talking about. So Robert McIntyre is actually playing better golf than Justin Rose this year. He's also got better form heading into this event than Justin Rose. And Robert McIntyre is at 68.5, and he's minus 150 towards the over. Now, Justin Rose, I have projected worse than Robert McIntyre. So if anything, he'd be even better odds for that over. Now, they don't have many other players to use for comparison, but like Sahith is obviously a much better player than Justin Rose is at this point. And he's even money out there at 68.5. So I think that there's a decent amount of sportsbook line value out there with Justin Rose, because if he had a line for comparison, he'd be at 69.5. And if he was at 68.5 on books, he'd probably be like minus 170 towards the over. So I think one of the bigger misprices that we have, and what we got on there, we got some troll down there in chat. That's actually crazy. Jeez Louise, I'm just going to ban you, dude. Some of people have no lives. I'm not even going to give them the time of day. This guy has cost me a lot of money. Yeah, dude, tell that to like the 30 other people down in chat that have only said positive things to this point. And by the way, that's like a single troll that's like commented on my Twitter like 30 times before. The guy doesn't have a life. And I could tell it's the same guy because nobody else is like a bitter piece of shit out there. So I'll just mute him. I'll send him on his way, get him out of here. It's unfortunate that some people try and act that way and say those kind of things down there in chat. So it's yeah, the lines makers trolling. It wouldn't surprise me if it was. Like, I talk a lot of shit. Honestly, the only person that I can imagine that would be that bitter towards me would be the lines makers, right? Because I don't really talk shit to many people. I try and be as like out of the way as I can when it comes to things. Like, trust me, there are things I could talk shit about out there. A lot of people know in the Discord like what I'm talking about, right? But I choose not to. Why air people out? It's just not worth it. Drama's not worth it, right? Then you get people down here in chat saying those kind of things. So yeah, maybe it's a bitter lines maker that's lost a lot of money because of the kind of props that I've made off them. That would make a lot of sense. You know, he's like, "Oh, you've lost me a lot of money." Yeah, probably because you're the lines maker that I'm taking all the money off of. So good stuff, dude. Have fun in ban land. And if you come back with another account, I'll just ban you again. It's really not that much of an issue. Let's go over here to Underdog now. So Underdog has been very bump heavy, as they normally are. And by the way, if it's one of the lines makers, it's definitely the Underdog one because he's the most down bad out of all of them. The ones at Prize Picks, they don't strike me as the kind of guys that would make that kind of thing. The one on Underdog, I could 100% see it though. Guy looks like a Reddit neckbeard, by the way. If you guys haven't seen that, it's hilarious. Oh, there's the guy down there. Yep, another one of these banned accounts. There you go. See ya, buddy. Yay. Same guy down there in chat just keeps making accounts. Get a life, dude. And genuinely, like, if that's what you spend your time doing, you've got a pathetic existence. All right, let's talk through this, though. If he keeps going down there in chat, I'll just ban him. We're not even going to talk about it anymore. So let's go through this. So I was looking at this under on Shane Lowry. I think every prop that I took over here on Underdog, though, has bumped. So I'm going to go through these, see if there's anything still hanging at the same kind of line. I do know that they that somebody would go out of the time to do that. And I absolutely will. I absolutely will look at that. All right, let's see what else we've got on here. So I like these three for overs. Again, once again, they've moved a lot of what I've taken here. I had this over on 3.5 birdies for St. Burns that got moved up to 4 because obviously I don't know golf, right? So that's why they're moving every single line that I take. Lines maker is just that down bad that he doesn't want people tailing me because he knows that I'm going to absolutely rinse some of his money this weekend. It's kind of funny that they're resorting to that. And see, so let's put those 4 in. Obviously, I wouldn't take these together because your payout would be absolute shit since you're correlating all 4 props. But what you could do with like these 4 props is, I think with the Scotty one in particular, like if you're playing MLB or another sport where you have scorchers, you could go ahead and mix in a scorcher to get a better payout there. Worst case, I'd play 2-mans with these sort of props because a 2-man slip with correlation, you get a pretty decent kind of payout on it. So it's not the worst idea to go ahead and mix those kind of props in for 2 because the payout shift isn't all that bad. And if you do make this like 2 strokes lines, for example, this JT prop I actually did take for an under. It's the one prop that hasn't bumped over here in underdog. You can see it's only 2.7x. So I think that's the way to play underdog, especially if they have some of these lines that are extremely off, would be to go out there and try and correlate them for a decent payout. So that would be my go out of it out there for this kind of stream. Would be to take some unders. And the reason why I like some of these unders is it did rain. It's going to be next to no wind out there and should be a pretty good setup out there for round 1. They're not going to make the course as hard as it can play out there for the first round. No wind. It's going to be as receptive as we get the entire week. So I think if there's a spot to go out there and take some unders, it's probably out there for Thursday. So you saw a few of the props that I like on there. Again, I'd probably go 2-mans because almost all of them are props that I would like for unders. There were some fades I wanted to mix in, so I guess I'll point those out. I actually think those ones didn't bump. So yeah, this Max Homa over is something that you guys could mix in. I also faded Jordan Spieth. Now they did move that one to 0.9x, but if you took this one at 0.9x and then you mixed them in with like Morikawa at 4.5 birdies for an over, that's 2.94x right there. Like that's a pretty decent payout. And this guy's got like 10 accounts down there. Just cracking me up as I ban them. This would be a good way to get decent payout too, right? So like up here, if you wanted to play that Scotty Scheffler over, which again, I think the 0.9x multiplier is actually just fine out there on Scotty Scheffler, is you could mix him in and then go down here to that Max Homa prop and then use him as a way to boost that up. So yeah, I guess I passed Max Homa as I was going down the board here, but that would be how you guys could approach that. So those are 5-6 props that I like over there in underdog. I would mix and match them as you please, whether you want to correlate for the 2.7x or get a slightly better payout by mixing in some of the fades. The idea, by the way, with the Max Homa over on bogeys and the Jordan Spieth over on bogeys both are losing strokes to the field heading in, and they have, I mean, Jordan has an okay track record. He's a slightly above average player at this golf course, but Max Homa is losing about a stroke per round to the field at TPC Southwind. So he's probably my favorite fade out of the bunch. In fact, if I had to give you my favorite 2 props, it'd be these 2. It'd be the over on Max Homa, bad form, bad course history, and then it's world number 1 for over at 4.5 birdies. So I don't think you can go wrong there. And because of the combination, you're also getting about a 3x payout. So that'll be the slip over there for underdog. Prize Picks, it's these 2, also a 3x payout because we have the over on birdies and then the over on strokes, which is, I think, the best way to attack this slate. Let me bring up pick 6. Let's ban like the 10th account that this guy has. You can tell this guy had a lot of planning into this. I'm flattered, by the way, that somebody cares enough to make like 15 accounts to go ahead and span my live streams. I never thought we'd get to that stage where I have guys down here just like spamming in my live chat. Like you see them on like all the big channels out there. Like, you know, you're going to get some weird haters out there. But I didn't think it was going to happen with like 5,000 subs. That's just kind of crazy. Guy's got 10 accounts. That's hilarious. All right, let's catch up on the chat because I had to scroll up a million comments now because this guy's 10 bots. So where are we at? How does the pick 6 payout work? So yeah, if it's the first time using it, you're essentially playing against the field. So if the rest of the field has a hard time getting props right, you're going to get more of the pie if you go out there and win. On the opposite end of the spectrum is true as well, right? If more people are winning in your pool, let's say it's like, I don't know, 30% of the field that's cashing their 4 or 5-mans, which would be a really high percentage, you're going to get pennies on the dollar out there for your payout. So it's it's different. It's how they can make it legal in some of the states that weren't able to do pick 'em before. And it can go both ways. Sometimes you can get a higher payout than you probably should, and sometimes you get a lower payout than you should. And almost like DFS, where you like almost want to take like low-owned plays, and if they work out, you get paid more. It's that same kind of idea, which I think works for DFS. For props, not so much. Let's get this guy's comments out of here. What's going on, Phil? Can I look at the pick 6 board? Yeah, we'll do that in a second. You've been eyeing Harmon for over birdies. He's at 4 in Prize Picks. Yeah, I was looking at that too. I ended up taking Wyndham Clark over 3.5, also Sam Burns over 3.5. So there were guys that are just higher birdie percentage guys that I'd rather take, but I think he's well within play. Thagala over 2.5 bogeys. I'd prefer the guys with slightly worse form, but you could say a lot of the same thing. So this guy's account, by the way, it's like all these different accounts and then like something talking shit about him. This guy's a professional hater. I got to give it to him. That's dedication. Guy is mentally ill. That's funny. All right, let's talk through this. So in terms of the pick 6 board, this is my first time looking at it. I have not seen what they've had to offer quite yet. So let's see what they've got in here. They do have a more combo at 4.5. So obviously you guys know that I like that prop. You could, in theory, mix it in on that site as well. The over on Max Homa strokes is not the worst idea in my opinion. The maybe even like an Akshay over, maybe even Adam Scott over down there at 68.5 strokes. And then for birdies, I already mentioned that more Cabo prop. I think the Hideki at 4.5 wouldn't even be like the worst lean. Maybe even like I mean over, not less. That's my apologies for hitting the wrong one there. But like a little bit of Aubert, Patrick Cantley, any of these sort of guys would all be well within play. So this is not my favorite board. They just don't have the best options. Like there's no Scotties, there's no Xanders, Rorys out here on the board. And on Underdog, they did have those guys at 4.5 birdies. So it's playable. There are spots that you could get to, particularly like a few strokes fades. Like this Adam Scott, this Max Homa prop at 68.5, I think are decent value compared to the books. Just to show you, I know they do have Max Homa here at 69 strokes. Not sure if they have an Adam Scott line, but he would actually, we do. He is at 68.5. But yeah, I guess if you're trying to find line value, you could take out Adam Scott because he's the same. Maybe run something like that out there on pick 6. But yeah, those are a few ideas out there for your own exposure. Alrighty, guys, that is all I've got for this live stream. Best of luck out there to everyone this week, but the random weirdo down in chat that is down there talking shit. Yeah, this guy's a D1 hater, that's for sure. And the video is still up. No winners last week. Dude, you had like 30 people in chat showing that there's winners. So you're full of shit too. Like on props, we had a pretty decent Sunday, especially. So you're just a little troll. You're a little under the bridge troll. You're going to get them. Like I said, you have nothing better to do with your time. And best of luck, man. I'm just going to get rid of your comments. I'm just going to ban you. You probably only have so many accounts to work with. The fact that you've had 10 already is pretty impressive, I must say. That to sit there, have that many emails to go out there and make his accounts is pretty hilarious. Yeah, another keyboard guy. Exactly, that's all they are. Trust me, it's the same kid too. Like I know who he is. He has like 20 Twitter accounts that he's commented on my shit before. The guy is a weirdo, right? Like if you spend that much time to do that kind of stuff, I'm sure he's got mental problems and legit mental illness, because there's no other reason somebody would do that, right? Like that's pretty strange stuff if you're asking me. But that's all we've got. We've got the weirdo out of here. I'm sure he'll comment a few more times and he'll get banned. But best of luck to anyone not named that guy, whether it's with your prop exposure, your DFS stuff. Hopefully you guys have a solid week and ready to get after it for all the action. You guys know the deal, right? Rounds 2 through 4, we'll be doing our regular showdown and prop streams. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you won't miss any of that when it comes out. For a start time on that, I will be posting that over on my Twitter/X. So if you guys want the latest details, you guys want to know exactly when I'm going live, if you set notifications on YouTube, you will get a notification when I do hit that. But on Twitter/X, you get a little bit of a head start or a head look ahead on when I'm doing that as well. So make sure to check that out. Best luck, as I said before, and make your boy proud. Take down a GPP or two, cash out on a few prop slips, and let's have ourselves a week.